Hello there. Before we get started on today's episode, I'd like to ask a short favor. If you're interested in either of the two books that I have written and am about to release, head on over to my website at theanxioustruth.com/books. There you can learn about both books, one of which is free, and you can get on my mailing list to be notified when each book is released and how you can get it. I would really appreciate that. Okay, let's get rolling. Welcome to That Anxiety Guy, Episode 8. Just the facts, please. Hey everybody, Drew here. Thanks as always for stopping by to listen. Welcome to episode 8 of the podcast. This week we're going to talk about what I think is a pretty interesting topic, and that is the difference between objectivity and subjectivity, and why it's so important to develop an objective frame of mind when assessing your physical and mental state at any given time. Now, we know that facing your fear without fighting or fleeing is an important part of recovery from almost any anxiety disorder. But we also know it's a skill that requires practice, so there are activities that you're going to have to engage in, things you're going to have to do, tasks you're going to have to do to learn to get this job done. But before you can get started on those things, we really need to get into an objective frame of mind. Like learning to assess your physical and mental state objectively, sticking only to the facts and not adding judgments, interpretations, inferences, or predictions is really important to the success of our recovery efforts. Now, I want to start by telling you a little bit about how my week went, because it kind of illustrates this point. Over the past couple of months, I've had a tremendous amount going on in my life. My business that I own has been crazy busy, which is good because it means we've got a lot of new business and new customers, but it means a lot of new projects and a huge demand on my time. Now, I can add that to, kind of the frantic demand on our time and stress that we get from normal, like family and home life, wife and kids and house and that sort of stuff. Then I add on to that the fact that last week, like the week before last, I was actually pretty sick. I wound up needing antibiotics. I had a strep throat. It stunk, right? I was flat on my back for 3 or 4 days. And this past week, I was still feeling the effects of that. So when I get into a situation where I'm really busy, I tend to fall into some bad habits, and those lead to things like not eating so well and skipping the gym too much, and especially not sleeping a lot. Right, I wind up getting into the habit of starting to work again late at night. I'll go sit in my office in the house and work till late at night, which means I'm not getting enough sleep. And as much as I hate to admit it, I am getting a little older, and that stuff catches up to you after a while. So historically, when I get to a point where I'm stressed and run down and I'm not eating well and I'm not in the gym religiously like I should be, that can be like the perfect anxiety storm for me. And this past week, it absolutely was. So a lot of people that listen to the podcast and follow me on social media, I think are under the mistaken impression that I'm completely somehow cured of all anxiety. Like it's not an issue. I never feel it anymore. And that's actually not true. So this week, having not really taken very good care of myself lately, with all the stress in my life and all the demands on my time and just not sleeping and whatnot, I was starting to feel anxiety growing almost the whole week. And by the time we got to Thursday morning, when I woke up, it was in full swing. I was actually feeling it pretty strongly when I woke up, and I was experiencing a lot of my kind of classic normal anxiety symptoms. And those included derealization and depersonalization, which for me, even now, are the two hardest symptoms to deal with. But I do, and I can't say that I'm afraid of them. I don't freak out with them anymore. But just because I can deal with them doesn't mean I have to like them. I still really don't like them. And I had a headache, and my neck was stiff. In the last couple of weeks, I've found that when I wake up in the morning, my teeth and my jaw hurt. So I'm obviously really manifesting some tension at night too, I think. Now, if I take the anxiety I was feeling on Thursday morning and I look at all those symptoms and I go back in time about 7 years ago, which was a very difficult time for me anxiety-wise. There was a lot of panic and agoraphobia things happening. What would I have done 7 years ago feeling the way I was feeling? Well, I'll tell you. I probably would have taken that pain in my jaw and immediately began obsessing about a heart attack, because we all know that jaw pain is possibly a symptom of heart attack. I know that I probably would have taken the depersonalization and derealization, and I would have been terrified of them, and I would have been fighting them, and I would have been very worried that it meant that I was somehow either going crazy or floating away. And I think many people can understand what I'm saying, that description. I would have spent the day in the house. I would not have left my house. I would have tried to work from home, but probably not been very productive. I would have spent the whole day on the edge of panic, and I would have been praying to whatever God I could think of to not have anything come up that would have me either engage the outside world or have to go out. That would have been a disaster. So feeling the way I felt this Thursday morning 7 years ago would have been a very bad day for me. Would have been very bad. But let me tell you how Thursday actually played out. I was up around 6, helped get my kids off to school, which is not that big a deal because they're not really little anymore. I was in my office, which is about 5 miles from home, 4 or 5 miles north of my house. I was there real early. I spent about 4 or 5 hours working with one of the guys who works for me, and we got a tremendous amount done. Then I got in the car, again, by myself, and I drove about 18 miles southwest of the house, went to a meeting that lasted about 2 hours, and we got a lot done in that meeting. And then I had to get back in the car alone and drive home during like classic Long Island ridiculous rush hour traffic. That is aggravating. It took me forever. And a lot of the times I was just stopped, stuck dead in the car, in traffic. There was really no way to go. I just had to be patient and wait. And if that sounds like a nightmare to you, believe me, 7 years ago, that would have been a nightmare to me. And actually Thursday, it wasn't the most pleasant experience. I hated it. Nobody wants to be sitting in traffic. That stunk. I was tired. I wanted to get home. I was aggravated by it. But when I did finally get home and I was able to really look back and see how my day kind of played out, and the fact that even though I was feeling so lousy for most of the day, I still did what I needed to do. I still lived my life, and I was happy with the end result of the day. That started to make me feel a lot better. Plus, I went to bed really early Thursday night, got a whole lot of sleep. I slept great, and I did feel much better on Friday morning. But the point is, I need to illustrate the difference between how the day went for me this week, feeling a lot of anxiety and anxiety symptoms, and how the day would have gone with those same feelings and sensations and symptoms 7 years ago. And what really is the difference? What's the big difference? Well, there are two differences. One is just the amount of time and effort that I did put into things like exposure work. So back in those days, getting in the car by myself and driving any more than about a quarter mile from the house was like total panic mode. So there was a lot of agoraphobic tendencies going on there. And I did spend a lot of time on things like exposure, but before exposure really kicks in, a lot of the difference was in changing my cognitive habits and mainly how I interpret the way my body feels and what's going on in my head. So when we're struggling with anxiety disorders, especially panic disorder and agoraphobia, and a lot of times health anxiety, we get focused entirely inward all the time. Right? We're always focused inward. We're almost never focused on the outside world. We become hyper aware of every sensation in our bodies. We're hyper vigilant in terms of every little change in temperature and pains and noises and clicks and twinges and whatever happens to go on. And we also spend all of our time in our own heads. We're constantly in our own heads. So we tend to make a full-time career out of constantly evaluating, monitoring, and assessing our physical and mental state. This totally fuels the fear cycle. So especially when we fall into the trap of adding judgments, interpretations, or even predicting the future when we're assessing our condition. It's crazy, and it totally fuels that cycle. Now, often, this is important because a lot of times the trigger that will lead you into a full-blown panic mode can be a very simple phrase. You may feel a little change in your body, a pain, a something, an ache, a change in temperature, or you may have a thought that maybe disturbs you a little bit. And often it's a little phrase like "it feels like" or "what if" that will take that small event and turn it into a full-blown panic situation. And then we learn to fear the sensation even more. So learning to be objective and sticking to just the facts when it comes to our thoughts and bodily sensations is really a huge key in getting past this common hurdle. Now, this is really important when it comes to the effectiveness of, like I was talking about before, when it comes to the effectiveness of things like exposure therapy. Right? So too many people that I know are quite capable of making progress through exposure will label exposure therapy ineffective for them for all the wrong reasons. So I'll hear somebody who says, I know you say I'm supposed to do exposure therapy, exposure work, but it just doesn't work for me. And I'll say, well, why doesn't it work? And this person may say something like, well, I've gone to the supermarket 8 times in the last 2 weeks, but when I'm there, it still feels like I'm going to die, or it still feels like I'm going to pass out. And in this case, notice the use of the phrase, "it feels like," which is not a statement of fact. That is not an objective assessment as to how that person feels. That's a subjective interpretation. It's almost a prediction of the future. And in this case, it's not the exposure that's failing us. It's the cognitive patterns that we're dragging into that situation. So learning to be objective in our viewpoint, which is so important, you really have to learn this. Learning to be objective usually means abandoning anything that involves predicting the future, guessing, or inferring what's going on. From a practical standpoint, it probably means completely eliminating a few phrases from your vocabulary, like totally throwing in the trash and doing your best to never, ever use them, never saying them, never thinking them. Like, let's look at 5 of these phrases. One is I think, it feels like, what if, is this, and I can't. Now, I can't is its own thing, and I'm going to have a whole episode based on I can't. But what I'm going to leave you with to think about with I can't until I run that episode is, before you get to the point where you go to I can't, you should check yourself and make sure you're actually either bleeding or have broken bones. Because you should never let a subjective interpretation, a fear-based interpretation of your state lead to I can't. Right, that's all I'm going to say about that now. That's its own. I can't is almost its own thing. But let's go back and look at the other 4 phrases. I think, it feels like, what if, and is this. So let's look at 2 statements here. I'm going to make 2 real simple statements and see if you can tell the difference. The first statement is, I'm feeling unsteady and disoriented. And the second statement is, it feels like I'm going to die. So look at the first statement. The first statement is simply a statement of fact. I'm feeling unsteady and disoriented, period. It describes what's going on. It describes observable reality, and it stops. The second statement, it feels like I'm going to die, is a subjective interpretation, right? The first statement is simply a statement of fact. The second is a subjective interpretation. When you're stating a fact, you stop after describing observable reality. You do not attempt to predict what might happen or explain why things are happening. Just stick to the facts and then move on. And eliminating subjective interpretation is a huge step for you. Tremendous. Because that's what will stop that little hot flash or dizzy spell or pain in your shoulder from becoming a giant full-bore panic attack that just reinforces the bad situation that you're in. All right, so we really need to work on completely eliminating those phrases. I think, it feels like, what if, and is this. You never want to say them, and you want to try not to ever think them. So when you're going to be monitoring the way your body feels, which you're going to be doing all the time, I realize that doesn't end overnight. That'll come with time. But while you're still doing that, while you're constantly worried about what's going on in your body, while you're constantly focused and up in your own head, you have to work really hard not to add any of those subjective interpretations. Just stick to the facts, be cold, be dry. Just state what's going on in pure, simple, factual terms and move on. This may mean that you have to spend all day long just simply repeating, my shoulder hurts, my shoulder hurts, my shoulder hurts, to keep yourself from taking the next subjective, irrational step. And if that's what you have to do, that's perfectly fine. But you really got to get in the habit of just sticking to the facts. Be objective, not subjective. It's going to go a long way. Now, I want to add another benefit here in terms of, I think a lot of people overlook this, but it's a big deal. When you are learning to be objective, when you can just stick to the facts and move on when describing what you're thinking and how you're feeling, your history with anxiety and panic can actually turn into an asset. Like, that's really true. And here's why. You may have suffered with anxiety, panic, agoraphobia, and related issues for many, many years. Maybe you're exhausted by it. You feel beaten down by it. You don't know when it's ever going to end, and it feels like it's never going to end. That's baggage, and that's pressing down on you. That's the weight of that experience being a negative in your life. But when you start to learn to think, to assess yourself objectively without making judgments and fueling that fear cycle, suddenly your experience over months and years in the past can actually work in your favor. So if in fact I am sitting in my car, which can happen from time to time, and suddenly I might feel a little pain maybe in my chest, instead of letting that turn into a full-blown panic because I think I may be having a heart attack, I am able to stay calm and just say, well, my chest hurts. Stop. And when you stay calm and you don't go into full-blown, oh my God, panic, irrational thinking cycle, I can actually look back and say, well, hang on a second. My chest has hurt probably 10,000 times in the last 30 years, and none of those times was ever a heart attack, and I actually never died. I'm still here. So that seems like common sense, but when we are in an irrational, fear-fueled thought cycle, common sense goes right out the window. So you can't really rationalize yourself out of that once it happens. You need to learn to stop that fear cycle from kicking in to begin with. So believe it or not, if you can build the skill of being dry, fact-based, and objective about how you assess your situation, then your history with panic and anxiety symptoms can actually turn into an asset instead of this crushing weight on your head. And I hope that makes sense. I know there's a lot of kind of out there concepts in this episode that we've been talking about, and that whole objective subjective thing is confusing to some people, but it's absolutely worth giving this a try. Just go back to the phrases, the what if, is this, I can't, what if, and it feels like, and I think. If you could just go back to those phrases and try and catch yourself when you find them creeping into your thought patterns or your speech, that's a good start. If you're struggling with the concept, at least kind of go to those phrases and try and get them out of your vocabulary. And I think you'll start to get a grasp on this and you'll start to see the difference right away. So that's where I'm going to kind of wrap it up. I don't want to go on for too much longer. Hopefully this has been helpful. And if it has been helpful, or you're confused, you have questions, you hated it and you want to yell at me, whatever it is, let me hear it. So the best place to start is always at my website, thatanxietyguy.com. Every episode is posted there. You can listen right on the website to any one of them, and you can comment right there too. There's also links on the website to all of my social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, Google+, I'm on Tumblr. So whichever one of those things makes you happy, feel free to follow me over there and let me hear it there as well. So questions, comments, kudos, angry rants, whatever it is, that's fine. The other thing that I'd like to mention is on my website, there is a little spot where you can sign up for my mailing list. The only time that ever gets used is to let people know when there's new content being posted on the site. So it's definitely, we're not going to spam you or sell your address or anything like that. If you like to use email, and that's an easy way to be notified, by all means, sign up for the mailing list. And if you're listening via iTunes, which many, many people are, and you are enjoying the podcast and think others might get helped by it as well, please take 60 seconds, write us a little review, and rate the podcast, because that's really what helps us get up in the iTunes rankings, and that's what helps spread the word. So again, if you're getting something out of this and you think others would as well, a rating and a review on iTunes is very invaluable. And of course, spreading the word via your own social media, Facebook and Twitter, is certainly appreciated too. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here, and I'm just going to remind you what I say every week, and that is keep moving forward, because every step forward is a good step forward, no matter how small it may be. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Have a great one. Hey, what's up, guys? Drew here. In the 5 years that I've done the podcast, I've never had a sponsor. But now it's time for me to put in a little plug for the day job, the business that I own. And that business is managed WordPress hosting. So if you have a website and it runs WordPress, and you'd like WordPress hosting that makes WordPress faster, more secure, and way easier than you ever imagined it would be, then check out Helix. You can find us online at imhelix.com. That's IAMHELIX.com. We took a long time to build Helix. I'm super proud of it. It works spectacularly. We take really good care of our customers, and I promise we would take really good care of you too. So if you're in the market for WordPress hosting that will blow your mind, check out Helix. I would appreciate the consideration. I thank you for coming by and listening, and I'll see you the next time.